Have you ever wondered why some Tauruses face the same difficult patterns over and over again? Why do certain painful situations seem to repeat themselves as if in an endless cycle? The truth is, Taurus carries some of the deepest karmic burdens of the zodiac. These are ancient lessons that came with your soul to be transformed in this lifetime. What if I told you there's a specific list of 14 burdens every Taurus needs to recognize and heal to finally break these cycles and evolve spiritually? These are patterns that repeat themselves generation after generation, passed from soul to soul, waiting for the right moment to be released. Those who watch until the end will discover not only what these burdens are, but also how to identify if you're carrying one of them. Those who leave now will continue to repeat the same mistakes without understanding why. Prepare yourself, because some of these revelations may deeply affect you. Karmic Burden 1. The first karmic burden Taurus needs to heal is excessive attachment to material things. This isn't just about liking beautiful things or comfort. It's about a compulsive need to accumulate, to hold on, to be unable to let go of anything they consider theirs. It stems from past lives where there was a traumatic loss of possessions, famine, or situations where survival depended on hoarding resources. In everyday life, this manifests itself when Taurus can't let go of worthless objects, when they accumulate things just in case, when they feel genuine panic at the thought of donating something they haven't used in years. It's that feeling that if they don't have control over material things, something terrible will happen. The superpower that emerges when this burden is healed is true abundance. Taurus discovers that the more they share and give, the more they receive. They learn that true security comes from within, not from without. They develop a healthy relationship with money and possessions, using them as tools for the greater good, not as shields against fear. Karmic Burden 2. The second burden is stubbornness that turns into destructive obstinacy. It's not just being determined or persistent. It's when Taurus refuses to change their minds even when all the evidence shows they're wrong. It's when they'd rather hurt themselves than admit they need a new direction. This burden comes from lives where giving in meant losing their identity or where change brought tragedy. You see this when Taurus persists in a relationship that clearly isn't working, when they stay in a job that's destroying them just because it's always been that way, when they refuse medical help because they've always been on their own. It's that inner voice that tells them that change is a sign of weakness, that giving in is losing. When this burden is transformed, the wisdom of conscious flexibility is born. Taurus maintains its solid essence but learns to adapt when necessary. It discovers that true strength lies in knowing when to hold on and when to let go. It becomes an example of how to be firm in values but flexible in methods. Karmic Burden 3. The third karmic burden is the deep fear of financial instability. It goes far beyond wanting security. It's an ancestral terror of poverty, lack, and material helplessness. It stems from lives where hunger was real, where lack of resources meant death or extreme suffering. This is why the Taurus of this lifetime can develop a neurotic relationship with money. Subscribe to the channel, activate the bell, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Your interaction makes all the difference in helping this content reach more people who need it. Karmic Burden 4. The fourth burden is extreme resistance to change. It's not just a liking for routine. It's when any change in environment, plans, or circumstances causes real anxiety, almost panic. It stems from past lives where sudden changes brought loss, separation, or trauma. Therefore, the Taurus soul has developed a defense system that tries to control everything to avoid surprises. In practice, you see this when Taurus becomes desperate if their favorite restaurant changes its menu, when they spend days brooding over a change at work, when they avoid traveling because leaving their comfort zone causes physical distress. It's as if any change is interpreted by the nervous system as a threat to survival. The superpower that emerges when this burden is healed is the ability to be an anchor for others in times of change. Taurus becomes someone who can adapt while maintaining serenity, who can see opportunities where others see chaos. They become a point of emotional stability for those going through transformation. Karmic Burden 5. The fifth karmic burden is the tendency toward possessive jealousy. It's not just about wanting to preserve relationships. It's a need to control and possess the people you love as if they were objects. It stems from lives where abandonment brought devastating consequences, where losing someone meant being completely alone and vulnerable. This manifests itself when Taurus constantly checks their partner's phone, when they're bothered if their friend makes new friends, when they try to control the outings and activities of those close to them. It's that irrational fear that if they don't control themselves, they'll be abandoned, as if love were something that can be lost if it's not constantly monitored. When this burden is transformed, Taurus develops the capacity for unconditional love. They learn that true love is freedom, that trust is the foundation of any healthy relationship. They become someone who loves without holding back, who supports without controlling, who offers emotional security without demanding exclusivity. Karmic burden 6. The sixth burden is the extreme difficulty in forgiving. When someone hurts a Taurus, they can carry that hurt for years, decades, even entire lives. They can't forget or forgive because they interpret any hurt as a betrayal of their trust. They come from lives where betrayal had catastrophic consequences, where trusting the wrong person meant losing everything. You see this when Taurus still talks about situations that happened 20 years ago as if they were yesterday, when they definitively cut ties for mistakes others would consider minor, when they carry resentment even toward people who have already died. It's as if pain is a treasure they protect, even when it hurts them. The superpower that emerges from healing this burden is deep compassion. Taurus learns that forgiveness isn't about forgetting or accepting the unacceptable, but about freeing themselves from the weight of the past. They develop the ability to see beyond people's actions, understanding that everyone is doing the best they can with their level of awareness. Karmic burden 7. The seventh karmic burden is self-esteem based solely on possessions. Taurus may develop the belief that their value as a person is directly linked to what they have, to what they can show the world. They come from lives where social status was a matter of life or death, where being nobody meant being disposable. This appears when Taurus only feels good when they're well-dressed, when they avoid situations where they can't impress, when their happiness depends on always having something new to show. It's as if they're just the sum of their possessions, not a soul with intrinsic value. When this burden is healed, true self-confidence emerges. Taurus discovers that their value lies in their essence, their capacity to love, their loyalty, and their determination. They learn to use material possessions as an expression of their personality, not as a definition of their identity. Karmic burden 8. The eighth burden is the difficulty expressing vulnerability. Taurus may have learned in past lives that showing weakness is dangerous, that being vulnerable attracts predators or rejection. Therefore, they develop an emotional shell that prevents anyone from seeing their insecurities, fears, or real pain. In practice, this manifests itself when they never ask for help even when desperate, when they prefer to suffer alone rather than admit they're not okay, when they use anger or coldness to hide hurt or fear. It's as if vulnerability were synonymous with weakness, when in fact it's the opposite. The superpower that emerges when this burden is transformed is true intimacy. Taurus learns that vulnerability is strength, that showing their wounds allows others to help them heal. They develop deep and real relationships because they're not afraid to show themselves as human, fallible, and in the process of growth. Karmic burden 9. The ninth karmic burden is the tendency to use silence as a weapon. When Taurus feels hurt or upset, they may simply stop speaking, creating a wall of ice around themselves. They come from lives where expressing discontent brought severe punishment, where it was safer to remain silent than to confront. You see this when they stop responding to messages without explanation, when they treat you coldly without explaining why, when they prefer to silently create drama, rather than talk about the problem. It's a way of punishing the other person for the suffering they've caused, but it also ends up punishing themselves. When this burden is healed, Taurus develops conscious communication. They learn that silence can be wisdom when used at the right time, but that clear communication solves more problems than creating mystery. They become someone who knows when to speak and when to remain silent, always with the goal of building, not destroying. Karmic burden 10. The 10th burden is paralyzing perfectionism. Taurus can develop such high standards for themselves that they end up doing nothing for fear of not doing it perfectly. They come from lives where mistakes had serious consequences, where almost certain meant total failure. This manifests itself when he postpones projects waiting for the perfect moment, when he gives up on dreams because there's no guarantee of success, when he harshly criticizes himself for any imperfection. It's as if only perfection is acceptable, forgetting that perfection doesn't exist in the human world. The superpower that emerges from this healing is excellence with self-compassion. Taurus maintains high standards but accepts that growth comes through trial and error. They learn that done is better than perfect, that courage lies in starting even without guarantees. Karmic burden 11. The 11th karmic burden is the difficulty delegating responsibilities. Taurus may feel that only they can do things right, that trusting others is too risky. They come from lives where delegating meant being betrayed or where others failed at crucial moments. In practice, you see it when they take on all the important tasks, when they can't take vacations because no one will take proper care of them, when they overwork themselves because they don't trust others' abilities. It's as if carrying the world on their shoulders is safer than sharing the burden. When this burden is transformed, leadership that empowers others emerges. Taurus learns to teach rather than do everything alone. I discovered that leadership is about multiplying capabilities, not concentrating responsibilities. They become someone who develops people rather than just using them. Karmic burden 12. The 12th burden is resistance to internal change. While burden number 4 was about external change, this one is about resisting internal evolution. Taurus can cling to old versions of themselves even when they no longer serve them. They come from lives where personality or belief changes brought social rejection or a loss of identity. This shows when he continues to react as he did in his 20s even though he's 50, when he refuses to question beliefs that clearly limit him, when he prefers familiar pain to the possibility of growth. It's as if evolving means losing who he is. The superpower that emerges from this healing is constant renewal. Taurus learns that they can maintain their essence while allowing their expression to evolve. I discovered that growing up isn't about losing identity, but about revealing deeper, more authentic layers of who they've always been. Karmic burden 13. The 13th karmic burden is the tendency to sacrifice dreams for security. Taurus can repeatedly give up their deepest desires if they pose any risk to their stability. They come from lives where following dreams brought disastrous consequences, where it was safer to conform than to dare. You see this when he always chooses the safest option even if it's not the happiest, when he gives up on projects that excite him out of fear of the unknown, when he lives an adequate but lackluster life. It's as if dreams are a luxury he can't afford. When this burden is healed, Taurus develops the courage to build security by following their dreams, not in spite of them. They learn that true security comes from trusting in their ability to create, not limiting themselves to what already exists. They become an example of how it is possible to be both practical and dreamy at the same time. Karmic burden 14. The 14th and final karmic burden is the difficulty trusting the flow of life. Taurus can develop a need to control every detail because they believe that if they don't constantly monitor, everything will fall apart. They come from lives where trusting in fate brought immense losses, where lax vigilance meant tragedy. This manifests itself when he can never relax, when he obsessively plans every possibility, when he feels he has to solve everything alone because he can't rely on higher powers. It's as if the universe is hostile and he has to fight alone against everything. The ultimate superpower that emerges from this healing is unshakable faith combined with conscious action. Taurus learns that they can plan and act without anxiety, that they can trust the process of life while doing their part. They develop the wisdom to know when to act and when to allow, when to control and when to surrender. Now you know the 14 karmic burdens every Taurus carries into this life. Some may have touched your heart, others may have made you think of loved ones. The important thing is to understand that recognizing these burdens is the first step to transforming them. Which of these burdens do you feel most connected to your experience or someone you know? Each represents an opportunity for growth, not a condemnation. Taurus who can heal these ancestral wounds not only frees themselves but breaks patterns that may have been repeating themselves for generations. Remember that you don't have to carry the weight of these burdens alone. They are there to be transformed, not to be endured forever. Spiritual evolution happens when we have the courage to look at these shadows and consciously choose to create new patterns. Your soul chose to be Taurus in this life because it has the strength to make these profound transformations.